The thunder that shook the heavens above Fort Sumner, New Mexico Territory, in the spring of 1881, was nothing compared to the storm raging in Preston Hayes' heart as he watched the muddy waters of the Pecos River rise with frightening speed. The small frontier town, usually quiet save for the occasional gunfight or drunken cowboy, had erupted into chaos as residents scrambled to higher ground, their belongings hastily packed into wagons or carried on their backs. But Preston stood motionless at the edge of town, his eyes fixed on the churning brown water that had already swallowed the lower pastures and was creeping toward the first row of buildings. "She's lost in the flood," they shouted as they rushed past him, their voices nearly drowned out by the pounding rain and the roar of the river. "Katherine Porter's out there somewhere." Preston's blood ran cold. Katherine, the schoolteacher, with hair the color of wheat fields at sunset and eyes that reminded him of clear summer skies. The woman who had arrived in Fort Sumner 6 months ago, bringing education and civilization to a town that had precious little of either. The woman who had politely declined his awkward invitations to Sunday supper 3 times, yet still smiled at him warmly whenever their paths crossed. He swung onto his dappled gray stallion, Thunder, and adjusted his hat against the driving rain. "Then I'll follow the river home," he said, his voice carrying a determination that surprised even him. "You're a fool, Hayes," called George Miller, the blacksmith. "The Pecos is a killer today." But Preston was already spurring his horse toward the southern path, where Katherine had been last seen heading for the Morales family farm to check on their children who had missed school for a week. The rain pounded against his oilskin coat as he rode, the leather creaking beneath him. 4 years as a Texas Ranger, before settling in Fort Sumner, had taught him how to track in the worst conditions. But the rain was washing away any traces Katherine might have left. The normally dusty trail had transformed into a slippery mess of mud that made Thunder struggle for purchase with each step. An hour into his search, the wind carrying his shouts away before they could travel far, Preston spotted something that made his heart nearly stop a woman's shawl, one he recognized as Katherine's favorite, caught on a branch near the river's edge. He dismounted and grabbed it, the blue fabric soaked and heavy in his hands. "Katherine," he shouted, his voice breaking. "Katherine Porter." Thunder whinnied nervously as the bank beneath them shifted, the hungry river having eaten away at it from below. Preston backed away, clutching the shawl as he scanned the roiling water. The Pecos had transformed from a placid stream to a raging monster, carrying entire trees and the occasional remnant of someone's life, a chair, a door, a child's toy in its muddy clutches. He remounted and continued downriver, following its raging path. The rain had lessened somewhat, but the clouds remained dark and threatening. Preston kept Thunder at a steady pace, his eyes never leaving the river as he searched for any sign of the schoolteacher. It was near dusk when he heard a faint cry almost indistinguishable from the wind. Preston reined Thunder to a halt and listened. There it was again, a human voice calling for help. He urged his horse toward the sound, coming to a small rise overlooking a bend in the river. Below him, clinging desperately to a partially submerged tree that had wedged itself against a rock, was Katherine. Her dress was plastered to her body, her long hair a tangled mess, but she was alive. "Katherine," he shouted, relief flooding through him. She looked up, her face pale with exhaustion and fear. "Mr. Hayes, thank God." Preston quickly assessed the situation. The tree she clung to was about 15 feet from the shore, surrounded by rushing water too dangerous to ride through. He dismounted and searched for anything he could use as a rope, finding only the lariat tied to his saddle. "Hold on," he called to her. "I'm going to throw you a rope." Katherine nodded weakly, her grip visibly faltering on the slippery bark. Preston uncoiled his lariat and swung it in a wide loop, aiming for the tree trunk near Katherine. His first throw fell short, pulled away by the current. He pulled it back and tried again, cursing under his breath when it once more failed to reach her. The water's rising. Katherine called, panic edging her voice as the river surged around her. Preston took a deep breath, focusing as he had been taught during his ranger days. This time when he threw the rope, it sailed true, wrapping around a branch just above Catherine's head. "Grab it," he shouted, already securing the other end around Thunder's saddle horn. Katherine reached up with one trembling hand and grabbed the rope, but she couldn't seem to muster the strength to pull herself along it. Preston knew what he had to do. He stripped off his gun, belt, and heavy coat, keeping only his knife. "Thunder, steady," he commanded the horse, before wading into the cold, swirling water, using the rope to guide himself. The current immediately tried to sweep him away, but he held fast to the lariat, his muscles straining as he fought his way toward Katherine. The water rose quickly to his chest, each step forward a battle against the river's fury. "I can't hold on much longer," Katherine called, her voice barely audible over the roar of the water. "You don't have to," Preston replied, finally reaching her. "I've got you now." He wrapped one arm around her waist, feeling her body shudder against his. With his free hand, he kept a grip on the rope as Thunder, sensing their need, backed up slowly, helping to pull them toward the shore. The journey back seemed to take hours, though it was likely only minutes. Every inch was a struggle against the river's determination to claim them both. Catherine's arms were wound tightly around his neck, her face pressed against his shoulder. Finally, Preston felt the riverbank beneath his feet. With a final surge of strength, he lifted Katherine and carried her the last few steps to safety, collapsing onto the muddy ground with her still in his arms. For a moment, they lay there, gasping for breath, the rain gently washing the river mud from their faces. "You came for me," Katherine whispered, her blue eyes wide with wonder. Preston nodded, suddenly acutely aware of how closely she was pressed against him. "I followed the river," he said simply. Katherine's hand reached up to touch his cheek. "Thank you." They made camp beneath an overhanging rock that offered some shelter from the rain. Preston built a small fire with what dry wood he could find, and they huddled close to it, Katherine wrapped in his spare blanket from his saddlebags. "What happened?" Preston asked as he handed her a cup of coffee he'd brewed. Katherine's hands trembled slightly as she took the cup. "I was returning from the Morales farm when the storm hit. The bridge was already underwater, so I tried to find higher ground, but the river rose so quickly." Her voice caught. "My horse panicked and bolted. I was thrown into the water and managed to grab onto that tree." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "If you hadn't come." "But I did," Preston said softly, "and you're safe now." As the night deepened around them, Preston learned more about Katherine Porter than he had in the 6 months since she'd arrived in Fort Sumner. She was 26, the daughter of a Boston banker who had died, leaving her with little money but a good education. She'd come west seeking independence and adventure, answering an advertisement for a schoolteacher in the New Mexico territory. "What about you, Mr. Hayes?" she asked, her voice stronger now. "What brought a Texas Ranger to our little town?" Preston stared into the fire, memories washing over him like the floodwaters. "I was tracking a gang that had robbed a bank in El Paso, followed them all the way to Fort Sumner where there was a shootout. My partner was killed, but we got the outlaws." He paused. "Afterward, I just couldn't go back. Something about this place felt right," Katherine nodded, understanding in her eyes. "And now you ranch and occasionally help Sheriff Davis." "It's a quieter life," Preston admitted. "Most days, that's a blessing." The rain had stopped by morning, though the clouds still hung low and threatening. Preston helped Katherine onto Thunder, and they began the slow journey back to Fort Sumner, the river still raging beside them but no longer rising. Katherine sat in front of Preston on the saddle, his arms around her waist to hold the reins. He was intensely aware of her scent, a mix of river water, earth, and something uniquely her, and the way her body swayed with the horse's movements. "The flood will have done a lot of damage to the town," Katherine said worriedly. "The school, we'll rebuild," Preston assured her. "Fort Sumner has weathered worse." They rode in comfortable silence for a while until Katherine spoke again. "I should have said yes, you know, to what?" Preston asked, confused, to Sunday supper. She turned her head slightly, her profile visible to him. "I was cautious. A woman alone in a frontier town has to be careful of her reputation." Preston felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the returning sun. "The invitation still stands, Miss Porter," Katherine, she corrected him. I think after nearly drowning together, we can dispense with formalities, Preston. The way she said his name, soft and a little hesitant, made his heart beat faster than any gunfight ever had. They reached Fort Sumner by midday, finding the town mudded and damaged but standing. People were already beginning to clean up, shovel in hand and determination in their eyes. A cheer went up when they rode in. Katherine Porter miraculously returned from the dead. Sheriff Davis approached them, relief evident on his weathered face. "Thought we'd lost you, Miss Porter. Half the town wanted to mount a search, but with the flooding." He looked at Preston with newfound respect. "Guess Hayes here beat them to it." "He saved my life," Katherine said simply, allowing Preston to help her down from Thunder. Word spread quickly, and soon they were surrounded by townspeople eager to hear the tale of the rescue. Preston noticed Katherine swaying slightly on her feet and cut the questioning short. "Miss Porter needs rest," he said firmly. "Doc Wilson should take a look at her too." Katherine's small house near the schoolhouse had survived the flood with minimal damage, being built on slightly higher ground. Preston escorted her there, insisting on checking inside before leaving her. "Sunday," she said as he turned to go, "for supper, if the invitation still stands." Preston smiled, tipping his hat. "I'll be here at noon." The days that followed were filled with the work of rebuilding. Preston split his time between helping in town and checking on his small ranch outside Fort Sumner, which had suffered some fence damage but was otherwise intact. His thoughts, however, remained with Katherine. Sunday couldn't come fast enough. Preston arrived at Katherine's house at exactly noon, wearing his best shirt and carrying a bouquet of wildflowers he'd gathered that morning. His heart pounded like a young boy's as he knocked on her door. When Katherine opened it, Preston momentarily forgot to breathe. She wore a simple blue dress that matched her eyes, her golden hair loose around her shoulders rather than in its usual practical bun. "You look." Words failed him. Katherine blushed. "Thank you. Please come in." Her home was modest but comfortable, with books lining one wall and simple, tasteful furnishings. The smell of roasting chicken filled the air. "I'm not the best cook," she confessed as she took the flowers. "Boston girls aren't exactly trained in frontier cooking." "It smells wonderful," Preston assured her. Their meal was simple roast chicken, potatoes, and biscuits that were slightly overdone, but to Preston, it was the finest feast he'd ever had. They talked easily, finding common ground in their love of books and their mutual exasperation with Mayor Thompson's long-winded speeches. As the afternoon stretched on, Preston found himself reluctant to leave. There was something about Katherine Porter that drew him in, something beyond her beauty or the dramatic circumstances of their deepening acquaintance. "I should go," he finally said as the sun began to set. "People will talk." Katherine walked him to the door. "Let them," she said softly. "I find I don't care as much as I once did about such things. Nearly dying has a way of clarifying what's truly important." Preston hesitated at the threshold. "And what is truly important to you, Katherine?" Her eyes met his, steady and sure. "Living, not just surviving." The weeks that followed saw a deepening friendship between Preston Hayes and Katherine Porter. They took to having supper together twice a week, alternating between her home and his small ranch house. On Saturdays, Preston often accompanied her on visits to outlying farms where she checked on her students and provided additional lessons. The town noticed, of course. Fort Sumner was too small for any relationship to go unremarked, especially one involving the handsome former ranger and the pretty schoolteacher. But the near tragedy of the flood had softened the usual harsh judgment of frontier propriety. Katherine had nearly died. Preston had saved her. Their growing closeness seemed natural, even fated. It was on a warm evening in late June, nearly 2 months after the flood, that Preston finally gathered his courage. They sat on the porch of his ranch house, watching the sunset paint the distant mesas in shades of gold and crimson. Katherine was telling him about her plans for the school's expansion, her face animated with enthusiasm. "I want to add a proper library," she was saying. "Even out here, children should have access to books and knowledge." "Mayor Thompson has actually agreed to allocate funds for I Love You," Preston interrupted, the words bursting from him like water from a broken dam. Katherine stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. I didn't mean to just blurt it out like that." A smile slowly spread across her face. "How long have you been waiting to say that?" Preston ran a hand through his hair. "Since before the flood, if I'm honest with myself, but certainly since I found you clinging to that tree in the river." Katherine moved closer to him on the porch swing. "I've been waiting for you to say it," she admitted. "I was beginning to wonder if I would have to say it first." Preston reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. "And what would you have said, Miss Porter?" Her free hand came up to touch his face, tracing the scar on his jaw from an old knife fight. "I would have said that I love you too, Mr. Hayes, that I have since you followed the river to find me." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, like a question asked and answered in the same breath. When they parted, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I'm not a wealthy man," he said. "My ranch is small," and Katherine pressed a finger to his lips. "I didn't come west looking for wealth, Preston. I came looking for a life that meant something." The engagement of Preston Hayes and Katherine Porter was announced the following Sunday at church, to the surprise of exactly no one in Fort Sumner. Mayor Thompson insisted on hosting a celebration at the newly rebuilt town hall, declaring that such a romantic story deserved proper recognition. "To think," he said, raising his glass in a toast, "that it took the fury of the Pecos to bring these two fine people together. God works in mysterious ways." Preston, uncomfortable with being the center of attention, smiled stiffly beside his beaming fiancée. Later, as they danced to the music provided by Jeremiah Wilson's fiddle and Samuel Parker's banjo, he whispered, "Do you think everyone would notice if we slipped away?" Katherine laughed, the sound warming him from within. "Absolutely. But let's do it anyway." They escaped to the relative quiet of the street outside, the summer night warm around them. Stars spread across the New Mexico sky like diamonds scattered on black velvet. "4 weeks seems like a long time to wait," Preston said, drawing her close. Katherine's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Propriety must be observed, Mr. Hayes. Besides, I need time to finish my wedding dress." "You could wear a potato sack and still be the most beautiful bride in the territory," he told her. She rose on tiptoes to kiss him. Charmer. Their wedding day dawned clear and bright, the scars of the spring flood long since healed. The small church in Fort Sumner was filled beyond capacity, with children sitting in the aisles and latecomers peering through the windows. Katherine walked down the aisle on Sheriff Davis's arm, her dress a simple but elegant creation of ivory silk that her mother had sent from Boston, along with her blessing and regrets that poor health prevented her from attending. Preston, waiting at the altar in his best black suit, thought his heart might burst from happiness at the sight of her. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began, and Preston marveled at how 2 simple words could hold such promise. Their vows were traditional, but spoken with such conviction that many in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. When Preston slipped the gold band onto Katherine's finger, purchased with money he'd saved for 3 years toward expanding his herd, her hand trembled slightly in his. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared. "Mr. Hayes, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was brief but tender, mindful of their audience yet conveying the depth of their feeling. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors, now as husband and wife, Preston felt a sense of rightness, of homecoming, that he had never experienced before. The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, with dancing, feasting, and more than a few emotional toasts. It was nearly midnight when Preston and Katherine finally departed for his ranch, now their ranch, in a wagon decorated with ribbons and flowers by Katherine's students. "Mrs. Hayes," Preston said as they drove under the star-filled sky, "how does it sound to you?" Katherine leaned against his shoulder, like the beginning of a wonderful story. Their first year of marriage brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Katherine continued teaching at the school while Preston worked to expand their ranch operations. Together, they built a life that blended his frontier practicality with her eastern refinement. The small ranch house was transformed under Katherine's touch. Curtains appeared at windows that had never known such adornment. Bookshelves filled every available wall space, and the kitchen became a place of experimentation, as she determinedly mastered frontier cooking. Preston found himself collecting books whenever he traveled to larger towns, bringing them home like treasures for his book-loving wife. Katherine, in turn, learned to ride better, shoot with reasonable accuracy, and help with the cattle during the busiest seasons. It was a cold evening in January 1882, as they sat before the fire in their snug home, that Katherine shared the news that would change their lives once more. "Preston," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I've something to tell you." He looked up from the bridle he was repairing, concern immediately etching his features. "What is it? Are you unwell?" A smile bloomed on her face. "Quite the opposite. We're going to have a baby." The bridle fell forgotten as Preston moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. "A baby, you're certain?" Katherine nodded. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it today. By late summer, we'll be 3 instead of 2. Preston pressed his hand gently against her still flat stomach, wonder in his eyes. "A child, our child." He looked up at her, suddenly anxious. "Are you happy about this?" "I know your teaching means so much to you." "I am overjoyed," she assured him. "I can still teach for a while and afterward. Well, we'll make it work. Many women do." Preston kissed her then, trying to convey all the emotions that words couldn't express. "I love you, Katherine Hayes." More than I ever thought possible. As Katherine's pregnancy progressed, the town rallied around them. The women of Fort Sumner hosted a baby shower, a custom Katherine explained was common back east but relatively new to the frontier. Preston found himself the recipient of knowing looks and advice from every father in the county, some helpful, some terrifying. "Sleep now," Sheriff Davis told him gravely, "because you won't be doing much of it later." The summer of 1882 proved to be another rainy one, though thankfully without the devastating floods of the previous year. Still, the memory of that time was never far from either of their minds. "I dream about it sometimes," Katherine confessed one night as they lay in bed, her hand guiding his to feel the baby's movements. "Being caught in the river, thinking I would die there." Preston pulled her closer. "I dream of it too, but in my dreams I'm always too late." She turned to face him in the darkness. "But you weren't. You found me." "I'll always find you," he promised. Their son was born on a scorching August day after a labor that left Preston pacing the porch, alternately praying and cursing as Katherine's cries reached him through the closed door. When Dr. Wilson finally emerged, wiping his hands on a towel, his smile told Preston everything he needed to know. "You have a healthy son, Hayes," the doctor said, "and your wife is doing well." Preston entered the bedroom on shaking legs. Katherine lay propped against the pillows, her face pale but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as he approached. "Meet your son," she said softly. Preston sat carefully on the edge of the bed, staring in awe at the tiny red face peeking out from the blankets. "He's perfect," he whispered. "I thought we might name him William after your father," Katherine suggested. "William James Hayes." Preston swallowed hard against the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "My father would be honored, as am I." Little William, quickly nicknamed, Will, thrived under his parents' devoted care. By his first birthday, he was toddling around their ranch house, getting into everything, his father's dark hair and his mother's curious blue eyes making him the darling of Fort Sumner. Katherine had returned to teaching when Will was 6 months old, bringing him with her to the schoolhouse where the older girls delighted in helping care for him during lessons. Preston often rode into town at the end of the school day to escort them home, a family outing that became a cherished routine. Life settled into a pattern of domestic happiness that neither Preston nor Katherine took for granted. They remembered too well how close they had come to never finding each other at all. Their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth Rose, arrived in the spring of 1885. Will, now almost 3, approached his new sister with a mixture of curiosity and brotherly protectiveness that melted his parents' hearts. "No river get Lizzie," he declared solemnly, patting the baby's hand. "Papa and will protect." Preston and Katherine exchanged a look over their children's heads, the shared memory of the flood a bond between them that needed no words. As the years passed, Fort Sumner grew from a rough frontier town into a more established community. The railroad came through in 1889, bringing new opportunities and challenges. Preston expanded the ranch operations to include a successful horse breeding program, while Katherine became the head of the town's school board, overseeing the construction of a new 2-story schoolhouse with the proper library she had always envisioned. Their family grew as well. Another son, Michael, joined them in 1887, and their youngest, another daughter named Sarah, completed their family in 1890. Their home, once a small bachelor's cabin, had been expanded multiple times to accommodate their growing household. Preston, now in his 40s with silver threading through his dark hair, often marveled at how his life had transformed. From a solitary ex-ranger to the patriarch of a lively family, from a man with few ties to one bound by the strongest bonds of love to this place and these people. It was on the 10th anniversary of the flood that changed their lives that Preston and Katherine rode out alone together, leaving their 4 children in the capable care of Maria Gonzalez, who had worked for them since Will was born. They followed the Pecos River south, much changed since that terrible day but still powerful and unpredictable. They stopped at the bend where Preston had found Katherine clinging to the tree. The landscape had altered, the tree long since washed away, the banks reshaped by subsequent seasons of high water, but they both knew this was the place. Preston helped Katherine down from her horse, and they stood together looking at the river, now placid in the spring sunshine. "I still think about what would have happened if you hadn't come looking for me," Katherine said, slipping her hand into his. Preston squeezed her fingers. "I try not to, the thought of a life without you in it." He shook his head. "I can't imagine it." Katherine turned to face him, her beauty only enhanced by the passing years and the life they had built together. "I brought something," she said, reaching into her saddlebag. She pulled out a small wooden box intricately carved. "I had this made by Mr. Jensen. Open it." Preston lifted the lid to find a gold pocket watch inside. He picked it up, noticing the inscription on the back. "I followed the river home," he read aloud. "Turn it over," Katherine urged. On the front of the watch case was an engraving of the Pecos River winding its way through the landscape. "Katherine, this is, I don't know what to say." Preston's voice was husky with emotion. She reached up to touch his cheek, a familiar gesture after so many years together. "You don't need to say anything. Just know that you are my home, Preston Hayes, you and our children and the life we've made together." Preston pulled her close, holding her against his heart. "And you are mine. From the moment I found you in that river, I was home." They rode back to their ranch as the sun began to set, the warm light gilding the land around them. Their children ran out to meet them, Will now a lanky 12-year-old, Elizabeth a spirited 9-year-old, Michael a thoughtful 7, and little Sarah, not quite 5, riding on her oldest brother's shoulders. That night, after the children were asleep, Preston and Katherine sat on their porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast New Mexico sky. The same stars that had witnessed their beginning, their survival, their love story written across a decade of shared joys and challenges. "Do you ever regret it?" Preston asked suddenly. "Coming west, nearly dying in a flood, marrying a rough cowboy instead of some cultured Eastern gentleman," Katherine laughed softly. "Never, not for a single moment." She leaned against him, fitting perfectly under his arm as she always had. "The flood was terrifying, yes, but it brought you to me. How could I regret that?" Preston pressed a kiss to her hair, still golden though a few strands of silver now caught the lamplight. "To think I almost didn't go looking for you that day. I nearly convinced myself someone else would find you, someone younger, faster. But you didn't listen to that doubt," Katherine reminded him. "You followed your heart." "I followed the river," Preston corrected with a smile, "and it led me home." In the years that followed, the Hayes family became one of the most respected in San Miguel County. Their ranch prospered, their children grew strong and capable, and Preston and Katherine's partnership remained the bedrock upon which everything else was built. Will followed in his father's footsteps, showing a natural talent with horses and eventually taking over much of the ranch management. Elizabeth, to no one's surprise, became a teacher like her mother, bringing education to even more remote areas than Katherine had reached. Michael discovered a passion for law and went east to study, returning to establish a practice in the growing city of Las Vegas, New Mexico. Sarah, the baby of the family, shocked everyone by becoming one of the first female telegraph operators in the territory. Her quick mind and steady hands perfect for the job. Through it all, Preston and Katherine remained each other's constant, their love deepening with each passing year. They weathered droughts and blizzards, economic downturns and personal losses. When Katherine's mother finally passed away in 1897, Preston held her as she grieved for the parent who had never seen her Western home or the grandchildren she had raised. As the new century approached, bringing with it automobiles, telephones, and changes that seemed to accelerate with each passing year, they sometimes reminisced about the simpler, if harder, days of their beginning. "Progress is a wonderful thing," Katherine remarked as they watched the first automobile chug down Fort Sumner's Main Street in 1903, causing horses to shy and dogs to bark frantically. "But I sometimes miss the quiet." Preston, now in his early 60s with fully silver hair but still straight-backed and strong, nodded in agreement. "The world is moving awfully fast these days, but they moved with it, adapting as they always had." Katherine embraced the new technologies that made communication with their far-flung children and growing number of grandchildren easier. Preston grudgingly learned to drive an automobile, though he maintained that horses were more reliable and certainly more pleasant company. It was in the spring of 1911, 30 years after the flood that had brought them together, that they received an invitation that stirred memories both painful and precious. The Historical Society of San Miguel County was planning an exhibition on the Great Flood of 1881 and its impact on the region. They wanted Preston and Katherine to be guests of honor, their story being one of the few happy outcomes of that tragic time. 30 years, Katherine marveled as she read the invitation. Her hands, once smooth and young, now showed the gentle effects of time and a life well lived. It hardly seems possible. Preston looked up from his newspaper, the spectacles he now needed for reading perched on his nose. "Does that mean we're old, my dear?" Katherine smiled, the expression lighting her face in a way that still made his heart skip a beat after all their years together. "It means we're fortunate to have had so much time together, to have built this life." The exhibition opening was a grand affair by Fort Sumner standards. Their children and many of their grandchildren attended, along with what seemed like half the county. Old-timers who remembered the flood shared stories with younger generations who had grown up hearing about it, but never experiencing such devastation themselves. Preston and Katherine stood before a display that included her recovered shawl, preserved all these years, and a map showing the flood's path and the spot where the rescue had occurred. A young reporter approached them, notebook in hand. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes," she began eagerly. "Your story has become something of a legend in these parts. The brave cowboy who followed the river to save the schoolteacher during the Great Flood. Would you mind telling me what you remember about that day?" Preston looked at Katherine, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "What do you remember, my dear?" Katherine's hand found his, a gesture as natural as breathing after 30 years of marriage. "I remember thinking I was going to die," she said honestly. "And then seeing this man, this stranger really, risking his own life to save mine." She squeezed Preston's hand. "I remember thinking, even as scared as I was, that there was something special about him." The reporter scribbled frantically. "And you, Mr. Hayes, what do you recall most vividly?" Preston's gaze never left his wife's face. "I remember hearing someone say, 'She's lost in the flood,' and knowing without a doubt that I had to find her, that nothing else mattered." "It's like something from a novel," the young woman sighed. "To think that such a terrible disaster could lead to such a beautiful love story." Later, as they drove home in the automobile that had been a gift from their children on their 25th anniversary, Katherine rested her head on Preston's shoulder, just as she had done countless times over the decades of their marriage. She called it a beautiful love story, Katherine mused. Preston chuckled. "She's young and romantic, probably doesn't realize that the real story happens after the rescue. In the everyday living," Katherine nodded against his shoulder. The children, the work, the arguments and reconciliations, the sorrows and joys. Exactly. Preston navigated a turn in the road, the ranch house they had built together coming into view in the distance. Though I must admit, the rescue makes for a more dramatic beginning than they met at a town social and courted properly for 6 months. Katherine laughed, the sound as delightful to him now as it had been when he first heard it. True, our grandchildren certainly prefer the flood version when they ask for the story. As they approached their home, the setting sun bathed everything in golden light, reminding Preston of that day 30 years ago when he had carried a half-drowned schoolteacher to safety, not knowing that he was also carrying his future in his arms. "Do you know what I think?" Katherine asked as they pulled up to the house. "What's that?" I think that young reporter was right. It is a beautiful love story, not because of how it began, but because of how it continued, how it still continues. Preston turned off the automobile's engine and turned to his wife, taking in the face he had loved through youth and middle age, and now into their golden years. The lines around her eyes and mouth spoke of laughter and occasional tears, of nights spent worrying over sick children and days spent working side by side. "I love you, Katherine Hayes," he said simply. "More today than yesterday, more tomorrow than today." Katherine leaned forward to kiss him, a gesture that had lost none of its sweetness over 3 decades. "And I love you, Preston Hayes, my rescuer, my partner, my home." As they walked hand in hand toward the house they had filled with love and memories, the Pecos River flowed peacefully in the distance. A constant reminder of how their story began, but not nearly as important as how it continued day by day, year by year. A love that had started in crisis, but flourished in the quiet moments of a shared life. The river had brought them together, but it was their choice to stay, to build, to love that had created the true miracle. And as the sun set on another day of their extraordinary, ordinary life together, Preston and Katherine Hayes knew with absolute certainty that they had indeed followed the river home to each other, to family, to a love story still being written with each passing day.